or some of our listeners who don't feel very sophisticated scientifically or mathematically, is it easy to understand the results that you received?
Well, I've only spent about 20 minutes so far looking
Oh, you
at
just
the material.
got it. Oh.
And everything I have seen has been, I mean, I would assume that anyone who had a good sixth grade education could probably follow it.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to say about what's happening today, but a good sixth grade education should do it. I mean, if you understand percentages and so on. I mean, for example, it says things like you have a 15% greater than average risk of prostate cancer, that kind of thing.
Right. It's amazing that you just received the news today and we're talking about it.
Right.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
I enjoy your show.
Thanks, Nick, very much. Thanks for listening. Anne on email has this to say, I'm assuming if you will be able to determine the genetics of a fetus via a blood test from the mother, that this would also include the sex of the fetus. Does that present an ethical problem with making it easier to sex select a child or weed out other unwanted characteristics using that information to end a pregnancy?
So ethics is separate from science. It presents an ethical problem depending on what your ethical system is. So I mean, that's pretty straightforward, I think.
Sarah in Zion, hi.
Hi there. Hey, I am curious about how you can tell what percentages a person is of Jewish background. Because, I mean, okay, I have some Jewish background, and I've always wanted to know how much is actually like of Middle East extraction, because because there's no like Jewish genetic marker.
There's not one marker, but there's a lot of very Jewish distinctive markers. So to go back really quickly to history, so there's different types of Jews. So Ashkenazi Jews are the most common in the United States. Over 90% of American Jews are Ashkenazi Jews, Poland, Russia, Lithuania, parts of Central Europe, Germany, right? So these individuals seem to be descended from a group of 500 to 1,000 individuals that flourished 500 to 1,000 years ago, okay? So when you look at Ashkenazi Jews, their genetic markers, the pattern in their genome jumps out at you, okay? You cannot miss it because these people all have these same common ancestors. And so when it tells you that you are 12% Jewish, that's very precise because the Jewish segments jump out. They're very distinct, okay? When you're asking about Ashkenazi Jews and what percentage Middle Eastern they are and what percentage European they are, and it looks like the European segment is Western European, say more like Italian or French than Eastern European, it looks to be about 50-50. It looks like they're all about 50-50 because they're descended from the same homogeneous population 500 to 1,000 years ago. That's the latest science, and it's pretty sure. This isn't like speculative. It's pretty definitive at this point.
And isn't it? I can't remember if it's Ashkenazi Jews or there are certain diseases, very rare diseases that certain populations. I would imagine there are others. If you can go back to just 500 to 1,000 families, that would be prevalent from generation to generation, and longevity, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know about the longevity part. I mean, Ashkenazi Jews have been so well studied, so that's part of it. You know, like the Jewish diseases are very well known because Jews have been studied as a population. Actually, French Canadians have some of the same issues, and they also descend from about 1,000. Like they descend from about 1,000 individuals that settled in New France 300 years ago. So you see some of the same, like different diseases, some of the same diseases, but some of different ones. So when you have these sorts of homogeneous ancestral populations that expanded, they tend to be certain patterns that recur over and over again within these populations, and they're diagnostic. Now, one thing I do want to say, there are a lot of diseases that are quote-unquote Jewish diseases that are much higher frequency in Jews, but because non-Jews outnumber Jews, most of the individuals with the disease will not be Jewish. That's a subtle point, but it's important.
Right, yeah. No, it is important. Thank you, Sarah, for your call. Judy in Superior, hi.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi.
I wonder if a person who has the physical traits of a grand person also would have the personality and intelligence and the other emotional, invisible traits. It seems like they also go together with the physical
Oh, that's interesting.
I can answer that.
Yes.
I have put some thought into this. So it depends on the physical trait. If it's a physical trait that's controlled by one gene, that's not very representative. For example, to be very precise, 75% of the variation in eye color in Europeans is due to one genetic locus, okay? That genetic locus comes from, 2 out of your 4 grandparents, and it's not very representative of the nature of your whole genome. On the other hand, something like height seems to be distributed across the genome, okay? Since it's distributed across the genome, the amount of ancestry or amount of heritage you get from a particular grandparent probably is affecting that trait a lot more. Does that make sense? Because if you have a trait that's distributed...
What I've observed.
Yes.
I do a lot of genealogy, and I've observed that the height and the build of a person has more to do with the same personality as a grandparent.
So... yeah, and I want to mention this number just to put it out there. So there's recombination differences between male and female. So this is only for paternal grandparents. But Graham Coop, a researcher at UC Davis, has calculated that I think it's like 1 out of 200 probability that your ratio of paternal grandparents could be skewed as much as 40% to 10%. Okay. So, 1 out of 200 is not that. It's frequent enough you're going to know people that are 40% one paternal grandparent and 10% the other, okay? So that's how that sort of thing could happen. If you have a short grandparent and a tall grandparent, and it turns out that the individual is very tall, it could be, well, they're 40% that individual, not the other one.
Okay.
Thanks,
That's what I've observed.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Deborah in Milwaukee, hi.
Hi. I think I have the crazy gene, and my son has the lazy gene. But that's teen-related. But, I'm not allowed to ask my chromosome question in my amniocentesis-related question, but which was involving my son, who's now 19. But I wondered if there's if there's a creative gene. I've always been just like visual, color, extremely creative to the point where it's been nothing, distracting from educate anything, fundamental in mathematics or anything. But so I wonder, do you learn that from your parents, or is there a gene for that?
Okay, so the issue here is we have to be careful about saying that one gene is responsible for a trait. A lot of modern genetics, especially human genetics, comes out of the background of studying diseases that are rare and where one gene has a very, very big correlation with the disease, right? But a lot of the characteristics like personality or height that are normally varying throughout the population, they are due to many, many, many genes. So it's very difficult to say that it's because of one gene. On the other hand, we know that there's variation in the population, and we know that variation is substantially heritable, okay? Which means that parents are correlated strongly with offspring, and if you look at the behavior genetic literature, you often see that biological parents and not adoptive parents can be correlated on specific traits with offspring, okay? So that is telling you that a substantial portion of the variation is something like personality or intelligence, and obviously height, are due to genetic variation and not the parental input directly, okay? So there are people who are naturally creative or people whose personality are extroverted, and it's not a coincidence that their offspring are like that. Now, I do want to caution that environment and your peer group and the cultural background does affect how these express, but we can't ignore genetics.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for the call. You say in the article that your goal in doing all of this is not to foresee your daughter's destiny. It is to understand it and shape it so that she can flourish. What do you mean by that?
Well, obviously I was interested in the disease aspect because if she had that disease, we would have taken a different course of in the article I mentioned that my daughter's pediatrician, for whatever reason, does not believe she should be tested for this condition. If she did have the condition, we would probably switch pediatricians immediately because we feel like it's our choice to make the healthcare decisions for our daughter, frankly, okay? So when you find out various things about the genetics of your offspring, they can inform you. Another thing that I mentioned in the article is there's a particular bitter taste receptor that a lot of individuals have, and that actually does affect how fussy your child is in terms of their response to various greens, such as salads, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and whatnot. And there's a tendency for mothers that don't have this trait where they can have a higher they basically can tolerate bitters to a much higher extent than their offspring. There tends to be a lot of mother-offspring conflict, right? So it can inform your perspective because people can view the world differently based on their genetic predispositions. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily determine everything about who you are, but it affects you. And so that's what I wanted to know.
Okay. We'll take more phone calls in a moment. Our guest this hour is Razib Khan, and we're looking at who we are genetically. It was an article that was in Discover Slate. It was on Slate that really we thought to be of great interest. Which grandparent are you most related to? Your family tree says you inherited 25% of your ancestry from each, but genetics says that you don't. Our guest writes for Discover magazine. He is a PhD student studying evolutionary genomics, and he has had the genome structure tested for really everybody in his family and got keenly interested in this and had his daughters tested when she was 2 months old. So we're talking about all of that this hour. Lines have been really crowded. There are some openings right now. 800-486-8655 is our number. 800-486-8655. Email talk@wpr.org. Facebook page is The Kathleen Dunn Show. And this is the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio. Back to phone calls now for Razib Khan, and Sally in Kenosha is next. Hi. Sally, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Hi.
I'm calling because a fellow called about was just receiving the 23andMe. I probably had it done like about 5 years ago, and I just wanted to say that the percentages, now I've gotten a couple of diseases that I was really low down. I mean, I